The evening was quiet, and the air carried that mix of coffee and baked bread that seemed to pour out from every cafe in the city. She walked slowly along the sidewalk, her heart beating faster than her steps, her palms slightly damp. Tonight was not just another evening. Tonight was her first blind date. She had spent the afternoon getting ready, carefully choosing what to wear, and fixing her hair in a way that made her feel both confident and comfortable. For her, first impressions mattered deeply, maybe even more than for others, because she was deaf. Meeting someone new always carried an extra layer of nerves. Would he accept her? Would he try to understand her? Or would he look at her differently the moment he realized she could not hear? She held her small purse tightly in one hand and her phone in the other, checking the messages she had exchanged earlier with the man she was about to meet. His words had been light and playful, and he had seemed eager to see her. That gave her hope. She reminded herself to breathe, to smile, and to trust that good things could still happen. When she pushed open the cafe door, the warm smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her like a blanket. The soft hum of chatter and the clinking of cups filled the air. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it. The way sound moved through a room and made people's expressions come alive. She scanned the tables, looking for someone who matched the picture she had seen. At a corner table near the window, a man looked up from his phone and gave a small wave. It was him. Her chest tightened for a moment, then relaxed. She walked toward him, her steps light but full of expectation. He stood halfway to greet her. His smile seemed polite but slightly distracted, like his attention was still divided. She smiled warmly, sat down, and took out a small notepad and pen just in case they needed it. She also lifted her hands to sign a gentle hello. The man watched her hands move but didn't respond. He leaned back in his chair, blinking, then gave a small laugh. "Oh, you're deaf?" he said slowly, exaggerating his mouth movements. She caught the words from his lips but didn't need him to overdo it. She nodded softly, signing again, and then picked up her pen to write on the notepad. "Yes, I am. I usually use sign language, but I can also write if it's easier for you." He looked at the note and nodded. "Okay," he said, still speaking loudly and slowly as if she were a child who couldn't possibly understand otherwise. She forced a small smile, telling herself to be patient. First meetings were always awkward. The waiter arrived and she ordered a tea, writing it down and pointing at the menu. Her date ordered coffee, barely looking at the server. When the waiter left, the man leaned forward. "So how does this work? Like, do you read lips all the time?" She explained through quick notes and a few signs, hoping he'd follow. She wrote, "Sometimes I read lips, but it helps if people speak normally. Exaggerating makes it harder. I can also use my phone if that's easier for you." He read the note, shrugged, and said, "Right, I'll just try." His eyes drifted back to his phone, lighting up briefly with a new message. He smiled at whatever he saw before setting it face down. She tried to keep the conversation going. She asked about his day, his work, what he liked to do in his free time. She wrote some questions, signed some, and smiled encouragingly each time he answered. But his replies were short, quick, and his attention kept slipping back to his phone. Inside, her excitement began to fade, replaced by a quiet ache. She had come here ready to open her heart, to give someone the chance to know her, but it felt like she was sitting across from someone who had already decided she was too much effort. The tea arrived, steam curling upward in soft spirals. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, hoping it might steady her shaking feelings. She took a sip, savoring its comfort even as the silence between them grew heavier. He cleared his throat, tapping his fingers on the table. "You know," he said, his lips forming the words too quickly, "I didn't realize when I agreed to this. I mean, it's just, communication is going to be hard." She caught the words, each one landing like a small stone in her chest. She picked up her pen and wrote carefully, "It doesn't have to be. Communication is about effort, not just sound. If both people try, it can work." He read it, sighed, and leaned back. "Yeah, but I'm not really used to this kind of thing." His eyes flicked to the window, then back to her. "I thought it would be easier." Her hands trembled slightly as she set the pen down. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she was more than her silence, more than the effort it took to understand her. But all she managed was a small, polite smile, the kind that hid the storm inside her. Minutes passed, filled with half-hearted conversation. She asked, he answered. She tried, he drifted, and then without warning he glanced at his phone again, muttered something about being late and stood up. Her eyes widened in confusion. He grabbed his coat, gave her a quick nod and said, "It was nice meeting you. Take care." Before she could even write a reply, he was gone. She sat there frozen, her heart dropping into her stomach. Around her, the cafe buzzed with life, couples laughing, friends chatting, the clink of cups and spoons. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it pressing in from all sides, a reminder of the world that kept moving while she sat there alone. Her tea sat untouched now, cooling quickly. She lowered her gaze to her lap, her hands clasped tightly together. She had hoped tonight would be different. She had hoped someone would see her for who she was, not just for what she lacked. Instead, she was left with the same familiar sting: rejection. Tears blurred her vision as she tried to blink them back. She didn't want anyone to notice. She didn't want to cry here in a place full of strangers. But the weight of it all, the hope, the effort, the disappointment, was too much to hold inside. Her shoulders trembled as she leaned slightly forward, trying to hide her face from the world. She told herself it was fine, that she had survived worse days, that she would get up and walk away soon. But in that moment, all she felt was the sharp pain of being unwanted, unseen, left behind. And yet, as her tears fell silently onto the table, she didn't know that someone nearby had been watching, someone who had noticed not just her pain, but her strength in holding it in, someone who would soon step into her evening in a way she could never have imagined. She sat frozen at the small table, staring at the empty chair across from her. It was as if the silence that had always been a part of her world now grew heavier, pressing down on her chest. The man was gone, but his words and the way he left lingered in the air like a shadow she couldn't shake off. Her tea was already cold, untouched after the first few sips. She kept her eyes down, tracing the rim of the cup with her finger, hoping the simple motion might calm the storm inside her. The truth was, she had imagined this evening so many times before coming. She had hoped for laughter, for curiosity, maybe even for the sweet awkwardness that first meetings often brought. But instead, she was left with rejection that felt far too familiar. She thought about all the times people had told her they admired her strength, her smile, her way of facing life. Yet in moments like this, she wondered if they really understood how heavy it was to carry that strength. She didn't want to be admired. She wanted to be understood. She wanted someone who would sit with her and try, really try, to bridge the space between her silence and their sound. But tonight had shown her again how rare that kind of effort was. Around her, the cafe carried on. A couple 2 tables over leaned close, laughing softly at something on a phone screen. A group of friends near the counter were deep in conversation, their hands moving as they emphasized every word. A little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the colorful cakes displayed behind the glass. All of it looked like a picture of life she couldn't quite step into. Her throat tightened as tears blurred her eyes again. She quickly wiped them away, but another fell before she could stop it. She hated crying in public, hated the way it made her feel exposed, yet she couldn't hold it in. The weight of loneliness was too sharp tonight. She told herself to get up, to leave before anyone noticed, but her body refused to move. Her legs felt rooted to the ground, her heart too heavy to carry. So she stayed there, small and quiet, hoping the minutes would pass quickly enough to make her invisible. What she didn't realize was that someone had noticed her. A few tables away, a man sat with a little girl, no older than 7 or 8. The girl was busy coloring on a paper napkin with a crayon she had pulled from her pocket, humming softly as she worked. The man, however, wasn't focused on his coffee or his phone. His eyes had wandered toward the young woman sitting alone, shoulders trembling ever so slightly. He had seen her smile at her date when she first walked in. He had seen the way her hands moved gracefully as she signed. And he had seen the way her date leaned back, distracted, barely trying to understand. Now he saw her sitting alone, wiping away tears she thought no one could see. Something in him stirred. He knew what that look meant, the look of someone holding pain quietly, trying to be brave while the world looked the other way. He had seen it before in someone he once loved deeply, and though years had passed since then, the memory was still fresh. He glanced at his daughter, who was happily lost in her little drawing. For a moment he debated whether to step forward or not. He didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to make her feel more uncomfortable. But as he watched her bow her head lower and lower, he realized that sometimes what a person needs most is simply someone to say, "I see you." Taking a deep breath, he rose from his chair. His daughter looked up, curious, but he gave her a reassuring smile and a small gesture to keep drawing. She nodded, her braids bouncing, and returned to her napkin canvas. He walked toward the young woman's table, his steps gentle, as though he were approaching a bird that might fly away if startled. When he reached her side, he didn't speak at first. Instead, he lifted his hands, and in the quiet language of signs, he asked softly, "Are you okay?" The young woman's head snapped up. Her tear-filled eyes widened as she saw his hands moving in the language that had always been her world. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. But no. The man was looking at her kindly, waiting for her answer. Her hands trembled as she signed back, hesitant. "You know sign language?" He nodded, smiling gently. "Yes, I do." She blinked, her tears threatening to fall again, but this time for a different reason. Relief washed over her, mingled with disbelief. In a room full of voices she couldn't hear, here was someone who could speak to her without effort, without impatience. "I saw what happened." He signed slowly, making sure his movements were clear. "I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to say you don't deserve that." Her chest tightened at his words. She looked down for a moment, then signed back. "It happens a lot. People don't want to try." His eyes softened. "That's their loss, not yours." She stared at him, struggling to process the sudden kindness after the sting of rejection. Her hands moved hesitantly, signing. "Why do you know sign language?" He glanced toward the little girl at his table who was still busy with her crayon. Then he turned back to her and signed, "My daughter's mother was deaf. I learned for her. It became part of our family." Something shifted inside her at that moment. The weight she had been carrying since her date left didn't vanish completely, but it eased enough to let in a small ray of warmth. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't alone in this moment. The man gave a small nod toward the empty chair across from her. "May I sit?" She hesitated only for a second before signing back. "Yes, please." He sat down, folding his hands lightly on the table, his expression calm and open. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could breathe again. As they began to sign back and forth, the world around them seemed to fade a little. She told him about her day, how nervous she had been before the date, how excited and scared she had felt walking into the cafe. He listened with his full attention, his eyes steady on hers, never drifting away. When she signed about how the man left, her hands slowed, heavy with the weight of her sadness. She didn't need to finish the sentence before he signed back. "You're worth more than this. Don't let someone else's carelessness make you forget that." Her breath caught, and for the first time that night her tears came with a soft smile. The young woman sat quietly, watching the man across from her as his hands moved with ease. The way he signed was smooth but careful, as though he wanted every word to reach her clearly. It had been so long since she had spoken to someone without feeling like a burden. Every time she signed something, he responded with patience, his eyes never leaving hers. The heaviness she carried from her blind date still lingered, but little by little, this stranger's kindness was breaking through. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her pain, much less reach out with such gentleness. After a moment of silence, she signed slowly. "Thank you. You didn't have to stop, but you did. Why?" He thought about it, his hands pausing before moving again. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is hurting but trying to hide it. And I know how much it matters when someone chooses to care instead of looking away." She studied his face, searching for any sign of pity, but there was none. His expression carried only honesty, and something softer, understanding. Her eyes shifted to the little girl at his table. She was still busy with her napkin art, tongue poking out in concentration, unaware of the conversation happening a few steps away. The woman smiled faintly, then turned back to the man. "Your daughter?" She signed. He nodded. "Yes, she's my whole world. She wanted to come out tonight for hot chocolate. I think she's happier with crayons than with sweets right now." The woman's lips curved into a small smile, the first real one since she had walked into the cafe earlier. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Would you like to meet her?" He signed, her hands stilled. She hadn't expected that, but something inside her warmed at the offer. After all the emptiness of her date, here was an invitation into a little pocket of real life, into something genuine. She nodded. He gave her a reassuring smile and gestured for her to follow. Together they walked the few steps to his table. The little girl looked up, her big eyes curious, and then she beamed when she saw the woman standing there. "Hi," the girl said out loud, waving excitedly. Then with small but practiced movements, she signed the same word. The woman's eyes widened and her heart softened. She knelt a little so she was at the girl's level and signed back, "Hello." The little girl giggled and showed her napkin, drawing proudly. It was a lopsided cat with a big round head and stick-figure legs. The woman laughed softly, her hands moving to sign, "Beautiful." The girl's grin widened. She nudged the chair beside her as if inviting the woman to sit down. The man glanced at the woman, his eyes warm. "She likes you already," he signed, so she sat down. And for the first time all evening she felt like she belonged at a table. The three of them began to talk, signing slowly, mixing a few words aloud when the little girl spoke, shifting easily between both worlds. The man explained that his daughter had learned some signs since she was very small, first because of her mother, and later because it had become their special way of speaking together. The woman listened closely, her heart tightening when she heard about the girl's mother. She didn't ask for details, sensing that it was a tender subject, but she could see how much love still lived in his eyes when he spoke about her. The little girl reached across the table suddenly, her tiny fingers brushing the woman's hand. Then she signed in her clumsy, childlike way, "You're pretty." The woman blinked, her throat tightening with emotion. She hadn't expected kindness tonight, let alone from a child she had just met. She signed back, her movement slow so the girl could follow. "Thank you. You're beautiful too." The girl giggled again, pleased with the reply, and went back to her drawing. The man watched the exchange, his smile quiet but genuine. "See," he signed, "you're not invisible. You're not too much work. You're someone worth knowing. My daughter saw that in less than 5 minutes." The woman lowered her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. Then she signed, "You don't know how much that means tonight. Tonight I felt like maybe I'd never find someone who wanted to try. And then you appeared." He shook his head gently, his hands moving slowly. "You don't need everyone. You just need the right people. Sometimes they show up when you least expect it." For a moment, silence rested between them. Not the heavy silence of rejection, but the kind that feels like a safe pause, where nothing needs to be filled because the air already carries enough. The little girl suddenly pushed her napkin, drawing across the table toward the woman. "Here," she said out loud, her small voice clear. Then she signed, "For you." The woman pressed her hand to her chest, touched deeply. She nodded and signed back, "I'll keep it forever." The girl beamed, bouncing in her seat, before reaching for another napkin to begin a new masterpiece. The man leaned slightly closer, his eyes never losing their gentleness. "I don't know what brought you here tonight, but I'm glad you came. Even if it started badly." The woman smiled softly. "Me too," she signed. She glanced at the clock on the wall. The night had gone differently than she planned, but in some strange way, it felt like the night she needed. She had walked in expecting a date that might lead to something hopeful, and instead she found comfort she hadn't realized she was missing. Her tea was still at the first table, abandoned and cold, but she didn't care. Here, at this table with a single dad and his bright little girl, warmth had found her again. The little girl suddenly tugged her father's sleeve. She whispered something he leaned down to hear. Then he laughed quietly and signed to the woman. "She wants to know if you'll come with us next time for ice cream." The woman's heart swelled. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, as she signed back, "I'd like that very much." The girl clapped her hands in delight, and the man gave a small nod, his smile widening just enough to show how much the answer meant to him too. The young woman sat there, watching the two of them, and realized that sometimes life doesn't give you what you expect. It gives you what you need. Tonight hadn't been about romance, not in the way she thought it would be. It had been about being seen, being valued, and being reminded that kindness still existed in places she hadn't looked. She reached for the napkin, drawing again, folding it carefully and slipping it into her purse. She wanted to keep it as a reminder that even after rejection, something better could appear. The man lifted his cup of coffee, now almost empty, and signed with a little smile, "To new beginnings." She nodded, her hands forming the reply, "To new beginnings." And with that, the heaviness she had carried into the cafe began to lift, replaced with something lighter, something like hope. The cafe had grown quieter as the evening stretched on. A few people had left, the clinking of cups and laughter fading into the background until only a handful of customers remained. The warm lights above gave the room a soft glow, as if the night wanted to wrap everyone in calm before closing time. She sat with the man and his daughter, feeling a kind of peace she hadn't expected when she first walked through the doors. The heaviness from earlier was still there, but it no longer defined the night. Instead, she felt something new: connection. It wasn't romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was real, and it was kind. The little girl was busy with her crayons again, this time covering the whole napkin in rainbow stripes. Her laughter came every now and then, small and sweet, as if she had no idea that her presence had just stitched together two people's broken edges. The woman turned her gaze to the man. His hands rested lightly on the table, his eyes on his daughter, a soft smile tugging at his lips. She studied him quietly, noticing the way his expression shifted between pride and sadness, as though love and memory were woven together inside him. She signed slowly, careful not to disturb the little girl. "You loved her mother very much." He nodded, his eyes lowering for a moment before he looked back at her. "Yes, she was my best friend. Losing her, it broke me for a while, but my daughter gave me a reason to keep moving." The woman let his words sink in. She could see the truth in his face, the way grief never fully left, only softened with time. She knew something about carrying invisible weight. In that way, maybe they weren't so different. She signed again. "I'm sorry." He shook his head gently. "Don't be. I was lucky to know her at all. Not everyone gets to love like that, and now my daughter reminds me of her every day. It's like a piece of her is still here." The woman smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. She glanced at the little girl again, who was now trying to draw both of them on the napkin. Stick figures with bright smiles holding hands. It made her heart swell in her chest. The man leaned forward, his eyes steady. "What about you?" he asked in signs. "Have you always felt people don't try to understand?" Her throat tightened. It was a question she had avoided most of her life, but somehow it felt safe to answer now. She signed slowly, her hands hesitating between words. "Yes, since I was a child. People are kind at first, but when they realize it takes effort, they step back. I've always had to fight to belong. Even tonight I came here hoping for someone to try." But he walked away before the night even began. The man's jaw tensed, not in anger at her, but at the thought of what she had endured. His hands moved firmly, every word clear. "That's not your fault. That's on them. You are not hard to love. You are not too much work. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Her chest burned as tears threatened again. She blinked them back, not because she was ashamed, but because his words reached deeper than she expected. She had been told many things in her life, but rarely had anyone said them with such conviction. She smiled, her hands trembling slightly as she signed, "You say it like you mean it." He nodded. "I do. I've seen what love looks like when it doesn't care about limits. And I've seen how strong people like you are. You deserve someone who sees all of you, not just what's easy." For a moment, the cafe disappeared around her. All she saw was this man and the truth in his eyes. She wondered how a stranger could make her feel more understood in 1 hour than her date had in their entire conversation. The little girl interrupted their quiet exchange by sliding the new napkin drawing across the table. "Look," she said aloud, beaming proudly. The stick figures had bright smiles, rainbow clothes, and a sun shining above them. Underneath, in uneven letters, she had written, "Happy." The woman placed a hand over her heart and signed to the girl. "It's perfect." The girl grinned and leaned against her father's arm, clearly satisfied with her work. The man looked at the drawing, then at the woman, and signed with a small smile. "She has a way of reminding me what matters most." The woman nodded, her own smile growing. "She reminded me too," she signed. "I thought tonight was ruined, but she made it feel like something beautiful instead." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. broken only by the little girl's humming as she reached for another napkin. The man finally leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the table. "Life has a strange way of surprising us," he signed. "Sometimes when something falls apart, it's only to make space for something better." She thought about that. She thought about the man who had left her behind without a second thought, and then about the man sitting across from her now, who had stepped forward when he could have looked away. Maybe this was what people meant when they said one door closes so another can open. The cafe lights flickered slightly as a staff member began to wipe down nearby tables. Closing time was approaching. The little girl yawned and rubbed her eyes, her crayons scattered across the table like tiny treasures. The woman stood picking up her purse. She didn't want the night to end, but she knew it had to. She looked at the man and his daughter, her hands moving with quiet sincerity. "Thank you for everything tonight. I thought I would go home broken, but you reminded me I'm not alone." He stood too, slipping his daughter's crayons back into her little pouch. He signed firmly, "You're never alone." "Not really. And if you ever need someone to remind you again, I'll be here." Her breath caught at his words. She nodded slowly, her smile soft but real. The little girl waved enthusiastically, signing in her wobbly way. "See you soon." The woman crouched down, hugging the girl gently. When she pulled back, her hand signed back, "See you soon." As she walked toward the door, the cool night air waiting beyond, she felt a quiet strength building inside her. The rejection that had crushed her earlier no longer felt like the end. It felt like the beginning of something unexpected, something better. She stepped outside, the crisp night breeze brushing her cheeks. Behind her, the man lifted his daughter into his arms, and together they left the cafe not long after. She walked down the sidewalk, her purse pressed close to her side. Inside it, the folded napkin drawing rested like a secret gift. She touched it through the fabric, smiling softly. For the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, life had more in store for her than disappointment. Tonight had taught her that kindness could appear in the unlikeliest moments, and that sometimes strangers could give you back pieces of yourself you thought you had lost. And as she disappeared into the night, her heart whispered a quiet truth she hadn't dared to believe before. She was worth more than what she had been given, and she always would be. The days that followed felt lighter than she had expected. The memory of the blind date that had left her crushed still lingered, but it was overshadowed now by something warmer. She thought about the single dad and his daughter more than once, remembering their smiles, their laughter, and the way they had made her feel seen. She hadn't planned to see them again so soon, but a small message appeared on her phone one morning, simple and signed through a video. "Would you like to meet for a walk in the park this weekend? My daughter would love it." Her fingers hovered over the reply. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in. Could she trust this feeling? Could she trust that someone like him could really care? But the memory of the night at the cafe was too vivid to ignore. The kindness, the attention, the patience, it wasn't an act. It was real. She typed back quickly, "Yes, I'd like that very much." When the weekend arrived, she dressed with care, though this time with a lighter heart. She felt more herself than she had in months, walking through the familiar streets toward the park where they had agreed to meet. The air smelled of early spring, crisp and full of the promise of new beginnings. When she reached the park, she saw them immediately. The little girl ran toward her, waving her hands excitedly, and she laughed softly, signing a quick hello back. The man followed more slowly, smiling, his hands raised in greeting as he approached. It was easy between them, as if the awkwardness of strangers had already melted into comfort. The little girl ran ahead to a swing set, then spun around, urging the woman to join. She hesitated for a moment, then laughed, signing, "I'm not as fast as you, but I can try." The man watched them both with a gentle smile, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "She's very happy you came." He signed, and his eyes met hers with quiet warmth. "I think she needed to see that kindness exists in the world, just like you did at the cafe." She shook her head, touched. "No, I think I needed it too," she signed. They walked together, talking in their shared language, their gestures forming sentences that sounded louder than any voice could. She told him about her week, the small victories and the tiny frustrations. He shared his own stories, about work, about parenting, and about little moments with his daughter that made life brighter. At one point, the little girl ran ahead to feed the ducks in the pond. She watched the ripples spread across the water, and the woman beside her signed softly, "I'm glad she has you." He nodded, his hands folding together. "And I'm glad you're here. You remind her and me that not everyone walks away when life is hard, that some people stay and care." The woman's chest felt tight with emotion. She realized that over the past week, something had shifted inside her. She no longer felt the same loneliness that had weighed her down for so long. That night at the cafe had been the turning point. It had reminded her that connection wasn't about what she lacked. It was about what people were willing to give. And some people were willing to give more than she had ever dared to hope. They sat on a bench watching the little girl toss breadcrumbs to the ducks. The man glanced at her, his expression soft. "I hope you know," he signed slowly, "that you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You are enough just as you are." Her hands moved with care, signing back. "It's hard to believe that sometimes, but hearing it from you, it feels true." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the soft hum of distant children playing, and she felt a deep sense of calm. She could breathe again, really breathe, without the tension that had followed her for so long. The little girl came running back, holding a small feather she had found. She handed it to the woman with a proud grin. "For you," she said aloud, then signed, "For you to keep." The woman pressed it gently into her palm, her eyes misting slightly. "Thank you," she signed. "I'll treasure it." He watched them quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting. Then he signed, "It's good to see you smile like this. I think we all needed it." They walked further down the path, the conversation flowing naturally. She told him about small things in her life he hadn't known yet. Her favorite books, a hobby she hadn't shared with many people, moments that made her laugh quietly by herself. He listened, attentive and engaged, asking questions with careful gestures and smiles. She felt seen in a way that was almost foreign, but wonderful. The afternoon stretched into evening, the sun lowering in the sky, painting everything in gold and pink. The little girl grew tired, so the man lifted her into his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. She watched the woman, her heart warm. "You've given her a lot tonight," he signed. "More than you probably realize." She shook her head, humbled. "No, she gave me more. Just being here, seeing her laugh, it reminds me what matters. Reminds me that kindness is real." He nodded, his gaze soft. Sometimes it takes a moment like that to remind us all that even after pain, good people can appear. They stayed on the bench a little longer, talking quietly, sharing moments that didn't need words. The world around them seemed to pause, holding space for something tender and true. When it was time to leave, they walked back toward the park entrance. The little girl skipped ahead, occasionally turning to wave at her new friend. The woman walked beside the man, hands brushing lightly now and then, each contact warm and grounding. At the edge of the park, the little girl paused. She signed quickly to the woman, "See you soon." The woman knelt to her level, smiling. "See you soon." She signed back and felt a gentle squeeze on her hand in response. The man turned to her, his eyes steady. He signed slowly, clearly, "Would you like to meet again? Not because you have to, but because I would like it. Because we enjoy being together." Her chest tightened, a mix of hope and relief washing over her. She signed back, her hands careful. "Yes, I would like that very much." He smiled, a soft, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Good, then it settled. As they parted, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. The night that had begun with disappointment had become something entirely unexpected. It had begun with rejection but ended with hope, with connection, and with the quiet certainty that kindness could still change everything. Walking home, she held the small feather the little girl had given her. It felt like a token, a symbol of the night's unexpected gifts. She thought about the single dad's words, the way he had signed to her, "You're worth more than this." And she realized that she finally believed it, not just in theory, but deep in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe life could be kind, that sometimes people showed up in ways you never expected, reminding you that even after sadness, there could be laughter, warmth, and care. She smiled softly to herself, her heart full as she stepped through the door to her apartment. That night she wrote in her journal simple words that carried everything she had felt. Kindness can appear anywhere. Sometimes strangers become the light we need, and sometimes a night that starts in tears can end in hope. And as she closed the journal, she knew that she would never forget this evening. Not the pain, not the warmth, not the small, perfect moments that reminded her that life had a way of surprising us, and that every person, no matter what they have endured, is always worth being seen and cherished. Weeks passed since that first afternoon in the park. Each time she thought about it, a quiet warmth spread through her chest. What had started as an evening filled with disappointment had become the beginning of something she hadn't dared to hope for. She and the man had stayed in touch, signing through messages, sometimes sharing small videos or photos of little moments in their day. It had started slowly, naturally, a simple check-in. How was your day? Or a photo of his daughter drawing, holding a new masterpiece for her to see. Every interaction reminded her that connection could exist without rush or pressure, without pretense and without judgment. One Friday afternoon, he sent her a message. Would you like to join us for dinner tonight? Just the three of us. Something small. Nothing fancy, just home-cooked. Her heart jumped. She hadn't expected an invitation like this so soon. She signed back quickly. I'd love to. Thank you. That evening, she arrived at their apartment. She was greeted immediately by the little girl, who ran toward her with the excitement only children could carry. She had on her favorite dress, the one with tiny stars scattered across the fabric. I made a card for you, she said aloud, then quickly signed the same words. The woman's eyes filled with warmth. She knelt down, taking the card carefully in her hands. Thank you, she signed back, her fingers trembling just slightly. The card was decorated with colorful scribbles and hearts, clumsy but perfect in its sincerity. The man came into the living room, holding a tray with 2 mugs of tea. He smiled when he saw her and said aloud, Hope you're ready. I promise the food isn't fancy, but it's made with care. He signed the same words, and she laughed softly at the gesture. Dinner was simple, roasted vegetables, bread, and a stew that filled the room with a comforting aroma. They ate together at the small table, laughing at little accidents, crumbs spilling, mugs clinking, the occasional playful disagreement about who would stir the stew. The woman felt an ease she hadn't known she could feel so quickly. After dinner, the little girl tugged at her father's sleeve. Can we tell stories? She asked aloud, then signed, Stories, please. He smiled at her, then signed to the woman. She loves stories. Would you like to tell one tonight? Her hands hesitated for a moment, then moved. I'd love to. She told a story she had loved since childhood, about a brave girl who explored the world in search of kindness. She used gestures, simple words, and animated expressions to bring the story alive. The little girl's eyes widened with every movement, and the man watched with admiration, signing occasionally to explain small words to her daughter. By the end, the little girl clapped her hands and shouted, Again! The woman laughed softly. Maybe tomorrow, she signed, and the little girl pouted just slightly before smiling again. As the night went on, they moved to the couch. The little girl curled up in her father's lap, holding a small pillow while the woman sat beside them. They talked quietly about small things, favorite books, funny memories, hopes for the weekend. It was ordinary in the most beautiful way. At one point, the man looked at her seriously, signing slowly, I want you to know something. You've brought more than kindness into our lives. You've brought hope, laughter, a reminder of how good life can be when people care. Her chest felt tight with emotion. She signed back carefully. I didn't expect to feel so welcome. Or so important. Thank you. He shook his head gently. No, thank you. You deserve to be appreciated, to be valued. Not everyone sees it, but I do. And she does too. He nodded toward his daughter, who was now playing quietly with her stuffed animal, but still keeping an eye on them. The little girl looked up suddenly, her big eyes sparkling. You're really nice, she said aloud, then quickly signed, Really, really nice. The woman pressed a hand to her chest, touched, and signed back. Thank you. That means a lot. Time seemed to stretch gently around them, the kind of time that didn't demand anything but presence. She felt a deep sense of belonging, something she had rarely felt in her life. Every gesture, every smile, every small word of kindness reinforced that she was seen, understood, and valued. Later, the little girl yawned and curled up fully in her father's arms. The woman helped tuck her in with a blanket, smoothing her hair gently and signing, Sleep well. Sweet dreams. The man watched quietly, then signed to her. You're patient and kind. That's something rare. And she will remember that about you. She smiled softly, almost shyly, and signed back. I hope she does. I hope she knows that kindness matters. After the little girl fell asleep, they moved back to the living room. The man poured tea into 2 mugs again and handed one to her. They sat quietly, sipping slowly, the silence comfortable this time. He signed softly. I know tonight was simple, nothing extravagant, but I wanted to show you that real connection doesn't need drama. It just needs honesty, patience, and care. She nodded, signing back. I see that. And I feel it, more than I can say in words. He looked at her, his gaze steady. I hope you know that you're welcome here, not as a guest, but as someone who belongs, someone who is wanted for who they are, not what they can give. Her heart warmed in a way she hadn't expected. Tears threatened again, but this time they were soft, quiet, and full of gratitude rather than sadness. She signed, I've never felt this way before. It's beautiful. He smiled gently. It's real. And it can grow slowly, naturally, if you let it. She nodded, letting the words sink in. For so long she had wondered if anyone would ever care for her in this way, without hesitation, without judgment. Now she understood that it was possible, that kindness, patience, and honesty could create bonds stronger than any fear or past disappointment. They talked long into the evening, sharing stories, small jokes, and quiet observations. They didn't rush. They didn't force anything. Each moment built trust and understanding, reinforcing the gentle rhythm of connection they had discovered together. Finally, she stood to leave, carrying a small gift from the little girl, another napkin drawing. This one with hearts and smiling stick figures holding hands. She pressed it to her chest, overwhelmed by its simplicity and meaning. The man walked her to the door, signing softly. I hope this is just the beginning. For all of us. She nodded, her own hands moving slowly. I hope so too. Thank you, for tonight, for everything. He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that made her heart steady. Good night, he signed, and she returned the gesture. As she stepped out into the quiet street, the night air cool against her cheeks, she realized how far she had come. Weeks ago, she had walked into a cafe with fear and hope tangled together. She had expected disappointment, rejection, and loneliness. Instead, she had found kindness, understanding, and connection that went deeper than she had imagined. Holding the napkin drawing in her hand, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She knew that life would continue to have challenges, that there would be moments of doubt and pain. But now she carried something stronger, the knowledge that she was worth seeing, worth caring for, and worth being loved in a gentle, patient, honest way. And as she walked home, her steps light and steady, she thought about the little girl's laughter, the warmth of the man's hand signing to her, and the soft certainty that even after disappointment, life could surprise you with something beautiful, if you were willing to let it. She smiled to herself, whispering quietly into the night, I am worth it. I am seen, and maybe, just maybe, this is only the beginning. The city lights shimmered ahead, guiding her way. Inside her heart, a quiet hope burned steadily, stronger than it had in years. And for the first time, she felt truly ready to embrace it, to trust it, and to let life unfold in ways she hadn't dared to dream. The weeks that followed brought new rhythms into her life. The simple joy of connection with the man and his daughter had grown stronger, like a small flame that warmed her even on the coldest days. She found herself looking forward to their afternoons together, their walks in the park, the quiet dinners, and the small shared moments that had become so important. It wasn't just about fun or companionship. It was about being understood, being seen for who she truly was, without pretension or expectation. Each time she arrived at their home, she felt welcomed in a way she had rarely experienced. The little girl ran to meet her immediately, squealing in delight and hugging her tightly. And he, the father, always greeted her with a quiet, warm smile, his eyes conveying more than words ever could. One evening, they decided to bake together. The little girl bounced around the small kitchen, gathering ingredients with careful attention while she measured and stirred beside her. The father moved around them both, handing out utensils, tasting batter, and teasing gently when flour spilled onto tiny hands or clothes. Careful with that, he said aloud. then signed the same. It's easier to cook than to clean a mess later. The woman laughed softly, wiping a smudge of flour off the little girl's cheek. I think a little mess makes it more fun, she signed. The little girl's eyes sparkled. I agree, she said aloud, signing enthusiastically. As the oven timer ticked down, they worked together on frosting a small cake. It was uneven, lopsided, and slightly messy, but each decoration carried laughter and shared effort. She felt a quiet joy settle in her chest, one that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with connection. When the cake was ready, they sat together at the small kitchen table. The little girl took a bite, her eyes wide in delight. Best cake ever, she declared, then signed the same to her. The woman smiled, signing back. I'm glad you like it. You helped make it perfect. The man watched the exchange, his hands resting on the table. He signed to her. You bring so much light into our lives. It's more than you probably realize. She felt her chest tighten, but it was the kind of emotion that brought warmth rather than sadness. She signed back slowly, carefully. I never thought I would be able to feel this. Connected. But with you two, I do. Later that evening, after the little girl had gone to bed, they sat quietly in the living room with mugs of warm tea. The night was calm, the soft hum of the city outside their window, and the flickering glow of a small lamp casting gentle shadows around the room. He signed, softly. I know this is sudden, but I feel something with you. Something I haven't felt in a long time. I hope I'm not rushing things. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, studying his eyes for sincerity, for hesitation, and found only honesty. She signed back, You're not rushing. I feel it too. Something gentle, something real, and I want to see where it goes. He smiled softly, relief and warmth mingling in his expression. Good, because I think we both deserve that. They spent the next hour talking quietly, sharing memories, fears, and small dreams. They didn't push the conversation forward with expectations or pressure. Instead, they let it flow naturally, allowing the bond between them to deepen with every gesture, every glance, and every gentle laugh. Weeks turned into months, and their routine became a comforting rhythm. Weekends were spent in the park, baking, or simply sharing stories. During the week, they sent short signed messages to each other, photos of little things that reminded them of one another. A flower blooming, a funny sign in a store window, or a moment that made them laugh. One rainy afternoon, she arrived at their apartment, umbrella in hand, and found the little girl jumping excitedly at the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. You're here, the girl shouted, running to hug her. Then she signed, I wanted to see you before the storm got worse. The woman laughed, brushing raindrops from her coat. I wouldn't miss it, she signed back. They spent the afternoon inside, playing games, telling stories, and listening to the rain tapping against the windows. It was ordinary, quiet, and yet it was perfect. She realized that these moments, small and simple, held more meaning than anything grand or elaborate could. After the little girl went to bed, they sat together by the window, watching the rain. He signed softly, Do you know how much you've changed things for us? The way we see the world now, it's brighter. She smiled, feeling a deep swell of emotion. You've changed things for me, too. I never believed in being seen like this, and now I do. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. We're learning together, then. Step by step, she nodded, her heart full. Step by step. The days turned into months, and the seasons changed. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came picnics, long walks, and evenings spent watching the sun set behind the trees. The little girl's laughter became a constant melody in her life, and the bond they all shared deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. She realized that she hadn't just found kindness in them. She had found trust, love, and a sense of belonging she had thought impossible. The man wasn't just a companion. He was someone who understood patience, grief, joy, and hope. And the little girl? She was a reminder that love could be simple, pure, and endlessly generous. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they sat on a bench in the park, the little girl sketching in her notebook beside them. The woman watched the shadows stretch across the grass, the soft breeze brushing her hair, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He signed gently, Do you remember the first day we met? She nodded, smiling softly. Yes, I remember feeling lost. And then you showed up. He smiled back. And here we are. Months later, and yet it feels like the right path has been found. She signed, her hands trembling slightly. Yes, it feels like home. The little girl looked up from her drawing. Are you happy? She asked aloud, then signed, Are you really happy with us? The woman's eyes softened and she knelt beside her. I am very happy, she signed. With both of you. The girl's grin was immediate and wide, and she hugged the woman tightly, squealing softly. He watched them, his own heart full. He signed slowly. I think this is what life is supposed to be. Patience, care, laughter. Love that grows without rushing. She nodded, her fingers moving carefully. And we are building it together. As the sun dipped completely below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the park, they remained there, the three of them connected in a quiet harmony. She realized that life hadn't just surprised her, it had transformed her. She had walked into a cafe with tears and walked out into a world where she felt seen, valued, and loved. She thought about the lessons she had learned. Kindness could appear unexpectedly. Strangers could become family, and even the smallest gestures could change a life. She pressed her hand lightly over her heart, grateful for every moment, every laugh, and every silent understanding shared in the language of signs. And as the night settled around them, she whispered quietly into the evening just for herself. This is what hope feels like. This is what being seen feels like. This is what it means to belong. The little girl tugged at her hand, pulling her attention back to the present. Come on, we can race to the swings, she shouted, then signed the same words. She laughed, signing back, You're on! And with that, they ran together, the three of them laughing, the park alive with warmth and joy, and a sense of belonging that promised a future full of love, connection, and endless possibility.